Couple of quick announcements. I think there is a clipboard passing around that if you want, put your email name on it, your name and your email on it, and it'll be going to Mayan. I want to thank Mayan for getting the word out as early as she did last week about showing up. So if you did not get an email about that, please see her to make sure you get on the emergency email list, for lack of a better term. If you want to be on the general emailing list that I have, please also give me one if you haven't already.
I'll send you the list.
Oh, that'll be great. So that, yeah, just give it to Mayan and she'll send it to me. If you have not been receiving emails from me, it's probably because A, it's misspelled and it's just bouncing into the netherworld, or B, I don't have it. So that's, I want to make sure that I have an updated list. So thank you, Mayan, for being our communications person. And thank you, Patty, for putting out a sign for those. I hope that if you did come, you got the sign that said we are not meeting. So I appreciate the teamwork of these two volunteer ladies who helped me out in doing that. I tried to send something out, but when I did that last week, I was at school. I don't carry my email list with me. It's on my home computer. So by the time I get home, it's like 5, maybe 4:30, maybe 5 o'clock. So that may be a little bit too late. As soon as I know, I like to send it out if something like that happens. If I'm going to be late at school for some reason, or like I said, my voice was just not working that night, and I did not want to strain it, so I would be completely out the next day. So anything like that happens, I always like to get out the word as soon as possible. So if you want to be on that emailing list, please be on it. Another thing is, I mentioned this a few weeks ago. I'm going to mention it again. This September, yes, September, beginning of April, and I'm talking about September. But it's a good way to start planning now, is a Catholic Answers Conference. This is the first, I think it's now up on their website, but this was the first notice I have of it. I'm planning on getting flyers about it because I really like the Catholic Answers Conference. What was it, 2 years ago I went to one on Protestantism because it was the 500th anniversary, and it was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. Mayan, you were there. Were you there at that conference? Or was that the one?
That was in the Bible conference.
Yes.
But not the Catholic Answer.
Oh, okay. That was another one that we went to. All right, I get them mixed up. But anyway, this one was a very good one. It's going to be in San Diego. The topic is the early church was the Catholic Church. And let me just read the little intro here. It says, today's myriad Protestant denominations all claim identity with the church founded by Jesus Christ as it existed in its earliest, purest form. But look what we find in the church during the ages of the apostles. 7 sacraments, the primacy of the Roman pontiff, devotions to Mary and the saints, and at the center of it all, a liturgy that represents the sacrifice of Calvary. If that sounds like Catholicism to you, that's because the early church was the Catholic Church. All Catholics who want to know and defend the faith need to learn about the time of the apostles and the early fathers, because it is in these ages that the Trinitarian, Christological, and Marian doctrines are defined, the structure and operation of Christ's church matures, and the form of Eucharistic worship takes place. That, I can't emphasize how this is what primarily, I would say, helped me get into the Catholic Church. I remember when I first went to Biola. If you don't know what Biola is, it's not Loyola. Don't get it mixed up. Biola stands for the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. It's one of the oldest evangelical Christian Bible colleges and universities in the country. It was founded back in 1908 out of the Azusa Street revival that happened at the same time. It is one, like I said, it's one of the largest and oldest evangelical Christian universities in the country. Anyway, I went there, and I'll never forget one of my freshman classes I took was Intro to Philosophy, and one of the professor talked about this guy named Irenaeus. And you know anything about Irenaeus, you know he's one of my favorite saints. He's such a favorite saint, I made him my confirmation name. That's how good he was. And I said, well, who was he? And he said he was an early church father that lived around 180 AD. I said, 180 AD? He said, yes, we have all of his writings. And I said, really? I had no idea that we had any writings other than the New Testament until the time of Martin Luther. I just thought everything was just kind of, there was nothing. It didn't even dawn on me that there were Christians that wrote that early. And here I found that there were a lot of early documents. And what made Irenaeus so important for the history of philosophy, or our study in philosophy, is that we were studying the problem of evil. And he mentioned that there are two primary theories as to why is there evil. And one is called the Augustinian theodicy, and the other one's called the Irenaean theodicy. And that's how I got introduced to him. And I was like, wow, had no idea. Well, to make a long story short, which with me is too late already, but when I started investigating Catholicism, I remembered these early church father writings, and so I started reading them. And I started to look at what did these people do in the early church? Because if we're going to be like the early church, like what I saw in the book of Acts, well, what happened after Acts? You know, what happened afterwards? How did the church conduct itself? Did they sit around and have Bible studies around the scrolls that St. Paul wrote? Well, not quite. What they did was they celebrated the Eucharist with the bishop present. And I thought, bishop, Eucharist, what's this? They talked about making sure that you confessed your sins before you receive, lest you receive unworthily. So they had confession. And it was like, what is all of this? This doesn't sound like my Protestant church, you know? And this is like real early, because see, the big myth of Protestantism is that, well, there was the book of Acts and there was the apostles, and then error creeped into the church and it corrupted it. And by the time it got to Martin Luther, everything was completely off base. And what Martin Luther did as the champion of the church is he brought us back the original gospel that got so muddled in all this years of ceremony and ritualism, you know, going to priests and sacraments and all of that stuff, that all you have to do is believe God, you know, accept Jesus into your heart. That's what the real gospel was. And I thought, well, that makes sense. At least to me it did. And then come to realize that all that stuff was in the early church to begin with. It was all there to begin with. So if I wanted to be a part of the church that Jesus founded, it started in Acts and then it continued. And all these other denominations are breakoffs of it. Luther, Presbyterianism, Episcopals, the Greek Orthodox, all of them broke off from the original church that was there before them. And what was that church? The Catholic Church. Complete with Mary, the saints, the sacraments, and the Pope. So it's like what I was doing was not what they were doing. And I started to think, I go, well, what if I was a Christian? Let's go back into my time machine here. Let's go back to the year 850 AD. 850. I'm a Christian. What's my denomination? Catholic. That was the only thing that was around. There were no Greek Orthodox. There were no Presbyterians. There were no Baptists. There were no Pentecostals. There were no Church of Christ Scientists. There were no Jehovah's Witnesses. There were no anything. If you were a Christian and it was the year 850, guess what you were? Catholic. You prayed the rosary. You honored Mary and the saints. You believed in the papacy. You prayed for the souls in purgatory.
And there was a pope?
Yes.
Okay. Who directed all this?
Direct in the sense that he is the head of the church, yes. Yeah. It's been that way since the beginning. So when you look at it that way, you go, well, why are all there these different denominations now? Well, because they all broke away in one form or another from the original church. And they have some elements of grace within them still. Some. But why settle for crumbs when you can have a full banquet, is what I was eventually confronted with. Mm-hmm. Yes?
You said it got corrupted and...
No, I didn't. I said that that's the myth that Protestants promote. That this is why Martin Luther revolted, is because he believed it had been corrupted.
I see, okay. But Luther brought it back to what he thought it should be.
Correct. That's the idea, yes.
And yet he went off on his own.
Right, which wasn't original Christianity. It's his version of it. And all other denominations are just that. Some man's version of what they think Christianity should look like. That's in essence what it is. Well, not all denominations are founded by men. There's one major denomination that was founded by a woman. Ooh, there's a good question. No, it was founded by Amy Semple McPherson. It was called the Foursquare Gospel Denomination. It's still in existence today. She founded Angelus Temple back in the 1920s. Popular radio charismatic personality. Very popular back then. She's the only woman in church history that I'm aware of that founded a major denomination, Christian denomination. Now some would say, well, what about Mary Baker Eddy? Mary Baker Eddy didn't found a Christian denomination. She founded Christian Science. It has nothing to do with Christianity. Christian Science is like grape nuts. It's not grapes and it's not nuts. Christian Science is not Christian and it's not science. Put that on the records, okay? Yeah. As I said it. Christian Science is like grape nuts. It's not grapes and it's not nuts. It's not Christian and it's not science. Got it? So she doesn't count as founding a Christian denomination. Okay? In the same way as Calvin founded Presbyterianism, John Knox founded the Baptists, Henry VIII started the Anglican Church, Luther started Lutheranism, and then there's all of the other subsets of those that go on ad infinitum. You go to any fly-by-night kind of a group on the street now that, you know, the street preachers, you know, they're founded by somebody who grabbed a Bible, had a conversion experience, and is now founding their own little local church. And I don't want to discount their own personal experience. I think it's very real. I think it's a good grace that has happened to them. I just think that it's misdirected. They don't realize that that grace was given to them in the context of the church as the primary sacrament of their salvation. The church itself was founded as a sacrament of the salvation of all men. You are aware of that, right? In the old Baltimore Catechism, it said, why did Christ found the church? Christ founded the church to teach, govern, sanctify, and save all men. That is the purpose of the church. That's a very succinct way of understanding the purpose of the church. To teach, to govern, and to sanctify, and to save all men. So you would say that the church itself is the mega sacrament of our salvation, because it is through the church that we become holy men and women. We become like Christ. We receive the gifts of grace that God has given us in the form of the sacraments. It is through the church itself that occurs. The church is here to teach, govern, sanctify, and save all men. Okay? You with me?
Yes.
And if you want to think in terms of Old Testament, that's what Israel was supposed to do. Israel was the light to the nations, to draw all men into the gospel that they had up to that time. And what was the gospel that they had? The law. God's law. Not man's, not pagan philosophy, God's law, coming from God through his prophets to his people. So Israel in the Old Testament was what the church is today. The light to the world, the gateway to salvation, the way in which God administers his grace and love to bring all to himself. Okay? I've said it before and I'll say it again. The church is Israel 2.0. You know, you have Israel 1.0. Now you have Israel 2.0. It's called the church. It's doing the same function that Old Testament Israel did in the pagan world at its time. To be a light to the world, a beacon by which God has funneled his grace back into the world after it was excised through sin. Do you see what I'm saying? And this is again why we have to start the whole story over again. Beginning with the creation of the universe, the creation of the first couple, and how sin entered and destroyed the disrupted the relationship between God and man. It was never destroyed. God is greater than our sin. Let's put that to